I'm an artist working with sculpture, drawing, painting and video. Most of the work is about this connection between the body and the environment, or these boundaries between the body and the landscape. I work in an abstract way. For me, it's quite a contemplative process. The Ribs Begin to Rise is the first time that I've connected directly with my family history and industrial heritage in Sunderland. I've been working for just over a year now on a new body of works, and they're pulling on quite a few different threads. So there's little moments of like family history and the roles that we had within industry, or connection with material, the natural environment. I started working with steel probably about 6 years ago, but didn't really fully realise that I was working with that material because of how much shipbuilding was part of the identity of Sunderland. The title, The Ribs Begin to Rise, is a line from a shipbuilding magazine from the 40s. It's a really beautiful description of the life of a ship being built, and it's got this really beautiful poetic language throughout it all. The ribs begin to rise is the first moment that the ship starts to take place. I like the idea of the title having two meanings, being about the first stages in shipbuilding, but also in relation to the act of breathing. So our ribs begin to rise as we breathe, and half of our oxygen comes from the ocean, and we are part of an ecology that we need to nurture at the same time as it nurtures us. The new works for the Ribs Begin to Rise are in 3 sections. There's a section called Holder Up. That was my great-grandfather's job title in the shipyards. So the holder up would have held rivets in place whilst they were hammered in overhead. I was just really struck by that job title, Holder Up, how it's such a physical act. It was really harsh environments that people were working in, but also I think there would have been a harmony in the way that people were working together that was probably driven by different forms of communication, because it would have been such a loud environment. Holder Up has these physical connections with material, but also I like it as a metaphor of bearing weight, holding on to something quite heavy, but also upholding something at the same time. In terms of what's carried on through generations, it feels very much like a transitional period for Sunderland. You can still see the impact of industry on the riverside and these scars in the landscape. Some of the structures from the shipyards are still there, but there's lots of new landscaping going on down the river, and there's such a contrast between these different generations. So the sculpture that I've made has those two different energy forces kind of happening at the same time. They're painted in parts with marine paint. This very industrial material that was used mainly to protect steel, but using it in a quite painterly way. There was a moment when I learned about the women who worked in the shipyards that completely changed my own relationship with materials, but also just connected me with that history in a way that I'd never felt connected to it before. The women in industry weren't well documented, and if there were queer people and non-binary people working in any part of these industries, our histories are always erased anyway, so that's not documented either. It's always described in the terms of women working in the shipyards during times of emergency, so that was mainly during World War II when the 700 women worked in the shipyards. And the sort of rhetoric is that it was only because it was emergency, but I think the reality would have been that some women and some people would have worked in that environment for the first time and completely thrived in that environment, because they would have had a connection with their own physicality in ways that they weren't allowed. So when I learned about these women who worked in the shipyards, it just brought in a different perspective that I thought there probably were people like me working in the shipyards. And I just think the more that we expand on those different histories that we've not heard so much about, the more people can feel connected. A lot of the energy in the exhibition is dedicated to the legacy of those women. And there's a section titled The Ribs Begin to Rise, which is the new installation. I'm going to be combining sculpture, video and sound in an installation for the first time. I like to subvert the qualities of steel, so it's known obviously as quite a rigid industrial material. I like the idea of creating space through it, or fluidity. The installation is this rib-like set of new welded steel sculptures, and within the installation there's going to be points where you can sort of look through the sculptures through to the moving image of the body in the landscape, and where you can listen to the soundscape within that as well. I make the welded steel sculptures, but I also make works on paper which are more automatically made, so they're quite abstract, and I use gouache. So they're very fluid and they're very different to the process of welding sculptures, which I quite like that contrast between those two ways of working as well. Sometimes I'll work outside, either taking sketches or actually starting the works. I wanted to include some works on paper in this exhibition that were made in Sunderland thinking about the natural environment. And it's just been about walking and exploring, mainly the journey down the river. The way that I work usually incorporates memory and the senses, and it's more about like physical sensation or the memory of a place. So for a long time I've been working with the memory of the River Wear. So now to be here and doing that journey again, one of the things that I've really connected with is the rewilding of the landscape around where the shipyards were. I was down at a pub called the Saltgrass with my dad. The Saltgrass is right near where Lane shipyard would have been, and hearing stories about how I used to get taken there in the pushchair. These are the places where life happened. They're like museums as well. The whole history is on the walls of the pub, and the pub is named after the grass that grew where the shipyards are. It was very salt-tolerant grass. It just made me think of what the landscape would have been before industry and how it's reclaiming itself since. A lot of the works on paper seem to come from these quite small memories of remembering the natural landscape when I was young, walking down the river towards the mouth of the river where it opens up into the sea. I think I was around about 14 when I first did that walk by myself, and it was a very empowering experience at that age in terms of my journey with the river and self-exploration as well. I went down the steps at the side of the Weir Bridge and then felt very unsure about where to go at first. There was a woman that was further ahead than me on the walk who just looked very self-assured and was given kind of like lesbian vibes and looked like she knew how to go where I wanted to go. It was like this connection with myself, connection with where I wanted to be, where I wanted to go, and literally following the water. And this idea of freedom or liberation, it's always been represented by the sea for me. There's a lot of restrictions put on queer lives. We're often described as being against nature. As queer communities, we've been often pushed into more urban environments for a sense of safety and community, and so that very peaceful, joyful, quite calm connection with the natural landscape. It felt like reclaiming that space for queer identity within the natural landscape. It was quite a political act, really. It's really amazing to be doing that now in Sunderland and connect with the River Wear in that way. That was really important at a formative age, and to be working with it as an inspiration now is really special.